In 332 BC, Alexander the Great faced a formidable challenge in Tyre, a challenge that would test his patience and ultimately unleash his fury. The Phoenician city, shielded by impregnable walls and surrounded by the sea, represented the final significant resistance to his Mediterranean conquests. For Alexander, conquering Tyre was more than a strategic objective. It was a matter of honor and authority. Yet Tyre refused to submit, and Alexander's response was ruthless. With unyielding resolve, he commanded the construction of a massive causeway to reach the island, enduring relentless attacks and destruction. Every setback only fueled his rage further, until the siege became an act of devastating vengeance, a brutal episode that would resonate through history. In the year 332 BC, Alexander the Great was on a mission to extend his empire to the most remote edges of the known world. Victorious in his initial battles against the Persian Emperor Darius III, Alexander now turned his attention to a city that represented more than a mere territorial conquest. Tyre, one of the foremost Phoenician centers, renowned for its wealth, naval power, and strategic importance. Tyre was not just a geographic target. It was the key to controlling maritime routes across the Mediterranean, a critical point in preventing the powerful Persian navy from receiving reinforcements. Capturing Tyre would enable Alexander to secure the region, neutralizing any threats of coastal attacks and ensuring safety for both his army and fleet. Imagine an island situated roughly 800 meters from the coast, surrounded by towering walls, some reaching an astonishing 45 meters in height. This floating fortress, guarded by an elite naval fleet, was a vision of strength and pride for any traveler or enemy who dared to approach. Tyre stood as a symbol of resilience and power, as if daring Alexander himself to prove his worth to the world. The Siege of Tyre was not merely a battle against a fortified city. It was an assertion of his authority over the entire Mediterranean. The very thought of leaving Tyre under Persian control was intolerable. In Alexander's mind, Tyre represented the last major resistance before achieving complete control over the maritime routes and securing an unchallenged position of superiority over Darius and his allies. Yet what Alexander did not know was that the people of Tyre would not be easily defeated. Every meter of that island would be fiercely defended, every resource marshaled for resistance, and the city was prepared to withstand the relentless force of a conqueror who already seemed invincible to the world. At first, Alexander sought to avoid direct conflict. Aware of Tyre's formidable defenses, he aimed for a diplomatic solution. Having already captured several Phoenician cities and secured control over Sidon and Byblos, Alexander sent envoys to Tyre with an offer he believed would demonstrate respect for Phoenician culture and tradition. He requested permission to make a sacrifice in the temple of Melkart, Tyre's chief deity, whom the Greeks often associated with their own hero Heracles. This offer, however, carried a hidden purpose. By performing a sacrifice at Melkart's temple, Alexander hoped to assert his authority over Tyre without needing to resort to force, symbolically claiming the status of protector and ruler of the city. But for the people of Tyre, the offer sounded like a veiled threat. They knew that opening their gates to Alexander would be tantamount to surrendering to the conqueror and potentially losing their sovereignty. The Council of Tyre's elders, represented by its noble leaders and defenders, firmly rejected Alexander's request. When Alexander received the refusal, he interpreted it not just as a diplomatic rejection, but as a direct affront to his authority and the fate of his empire. In a moment of anger, he vowed that Tyre would fall. If Tyre's leaders had believed he would abandon his effort, they were now facing a grave miscalculation. Alexander was not only preparing for a siege, he was preparing with unyielding determination. To Alexander, Tyre's refusal echoed as an insult to all the military effort he had invested to reach this point. At just 24 years old, this young commander had already subdued empires and challenged kings. In his eyes, Tyre could not be an exception. Thus, he began sketching plans for something that at the time seemed unthinkable: a siege against an island city, protected by deep waters and walls that made it nearly invincible. Alexander was known for his ability to resolve tactical challenges with unprecedented creativity. Even before he conceived the full plan for the siege, he knew the assault would require vast resources, time, and sacrifice. His generals questioned the logic of a siege. Some believed that with time, Tyre might surrender or, at the very least, weaken its defenses. But Alexander was unwilling to take that risk. He knew that time worked against him, as the Persian army could be regrouping for a counterattack. This battle was not merely strategic, it was a matter of prestige. With unwavering vision, he informed his commanders that the siege would commence. The first challenge lay ahead: how to cross the waters that separated the mainland from the island of Tyre, overcoming natural defenses and the defenders' superior position. The answer lay in an audacious and innovative plan: the construction of an artificial causeway. But Alexander knew that this obstacle was only the beginning. In the months that followed, he would face unprecedented challenges in a battle of ingenuity and might, where each advance seemed to feed the fierce resistance of Tyre's inhabitants. When Alexander resolved to conquer Tyre, he understood that capturing the city would require something beyond conventional strategies. Tyre was surrounded by water, and its towering, resilient walls shielded its inhabitants from any attack by sea. As he surveyed the island, Alexander conceived an audacious idea that would change the course of the siege. He would order the construction of a causeway, a massive bridge of earth and stone that would connect the mainland to the island. Building this causeway was a monumental task. Alexander commanded his soldiers, laborers, and slaves to begin the project using every available resource. They hauled vast quantities of stones and timber, creating a solid foundation that gradually extended toward Tyre. Initially, progress was steady, and Alexander's army began to believe that they would soon reach the city and breach its defenses with ease. But the people of Tyre were vigilant, closely monitoring every move of the Macedonian forces. The Tyrians did not remain passive in the face of this construction. They knew that if the causeway were completed, their city would be vulnerable to invasion. With a fleet of nimble ships and powerful weapons, Tyre's defenders launched a series of fierce offensives against the causeway. Each time Alexander's men laid a new stone, Tyrian ships would approach, unleashing volleys of flaming arrows, hurling stones, and even pouring burning oil to destroy whatever they could. With each assault, parts of the causeway were destroyed, forcing Alexander's soldiers to rebuild continuously. This relentless cycle was exhausting and frustrating for the Macedonian army, which battled not only the Tyrian attacks, but also the fatigue and harsh coastal climate. Yet Alexander refused to be deterred. He decided to reinforce the causeway, constructing protective towers along the bridge to shield his workers and strengthen their advance. Nature, however, did not cooperate. Strong winds, high waves, and frequent rains made the work even more grueling. The churning waters threatened the structure, causing sections of the causeway to give way. Even so, Alexander persisted. He knew that to retreat now would mean failure, and victory was essential to his broader plan of conquering the Persian Empire. Despite the hardships and losses, the causeway inched closer to the island. Every meter gained was a triumph, but it also served as a warning to Tyre's defenders, who prepared ever more ingenious and destructive attacks. Little did Alexander know that Tyre had one final powerful weapon in store, one that could shift the course of this relentless battle. The people of Tyre were determined to defend their city to the end. As Alexander's causeway drew closer to their walls, the urgency to halt his advance became undeniable. Using every skill and resource at their disposal, Tyre's defenders launched increasingly destructive attacks against the causeway and Alexander's soldiers. They knew that to prevent an invasion, they would need to stop the causeway at all costs. In a shocking maneuver, the Tyrians launched a devastating surprise attack against the Macedonian army. They prepared a fire ship, a large vessel loaded with dry wood and flammable oil, meticulously positioned for a special assault. As the fire ship drifted toward the causeway, Alexander's soldiers looked on in confusion, trying to understand what was happening. When it drew close enough, the Tyrians set the ship ablaze. Flames quickly engulfed it, turning the vessel into a fiery projectile that surged toward the causeway. The impact was catastrophic. Fire spread rapidly across the structure, consuming a large section of the causeway and killing many of Alexander's soldiers. The Tyrians' bold action unleashed a wave of panic and frustration among the Macedonians. The destruction meant that Alexander's army would have to restart much of the work, buying Tyre precious time to bolster its defenses. Facing these setbacks and recognizing Tyre's powerful naval advantage, Alexander made a strategic decision. He needed naval support. He dispatched envoys to allied cities and soon received reinforcements from Sidon, Byblos, Cyprus and other coastal regions that supported his cause against the Persian Empire. With a new fleet at his command, Alexander established a naval blockade around Tyre, cutting off the city's supply lines and hampering the Tyrian boats' ability to attack the causeway. This fleet also provided much-needed protection for Alexander's workers, ensuring the continued progress of the causeway with greater security. Now, Alexander controlled the seas around Tyre, intensifying the siege. With the blockade in place and the causeway advancing steadily toward the city, pressure on Tyre's inhabitants mounted. They realized that their options were running out. Hunger and fear began to spread throughout the city, but Tyre's resistance remained resilient. The Tyrians launched attacks whenever possible, their defenders displaying remarkable courage, fighting to the last moment with every weapon and tactic available. For Alexander, the siege had now become a matter of time. With his new fleet in position and the causeway nearly complete, he was preparing for a final assault on Tyre. With the causeway nearly complete and his fleet surrounding the city from all sides, Alexander prepared for the final attack on Tyre. The months-long siege had worn down the defenders, leaving the city isolated and weakened. Now, Alexander's army was ready to strike from both land and sea in a coordinated effort that promised to be overwhelming. Alexander devised a two-pronged offensive. As his troops on the causeway advanced directly toward the city's walls, his naval fleet would encircle Tyre, pressing its defenses from all directions. Catapults were positioned on the causeway, and battering rams were ready to break through the walls. Additionally, Alexander deployed massive siege towers that would allow his soldiers to scale Tyre's defenses, launching an invasion from above. From the sea, Alexander's ships targeted strategic points along the walls, unleashing a rain of arrows to weaken the defenders. This large-scale operation depended on precise coordination between the causeway's advance and the naval assault. The soldiers were motivated. After months of siege, all were eager to end this battle and achieve victory. On the day of the assault, Alexander's forces surged forward with all their might. The catapults hurled massive stones at the walls, while the battering rams on the causeway struck the city's gates repeatedly. Tyre's defenders fought bravely, but they were overburdened and had few resources left to withstand such an assault. With each impact, Tyre's walls began to buckle. The siege towers enabled Alexander's soldiers to scale the walls directly, engaging the defenders in close-quarters combat. The scene was chaotic and bloody. Tyre's inhabitants fought with every ounce of strength they had, but Alexander's numerical advantage and strategic coordination were overpowering. Once the walls were breached, Alexander's troops poured into the city. Tyre's streets became battlegrounds as his soldiers clashed with the last of the Tyrian resistance. Block by block, the city was overtaken, with many inhabitants desperately trying to protect their families and possessions. The invasion was swift and merciless. Tyre's defenders fought to the last, but they could not halt the Macedonian advance. Within hours, the city fell, and Alexander's victory was complete. Tyre, which had resisted so courageously for months, was now under the control of the young conqueror. Yet, the consequences of this siege would be as devastating as the battle itself. The city lay in ruins, and amidst the cries and chaos of battle, Alexander declared Tyre's final fate. The siege had ended, but the price of Tyre's defiance would be exacted with brutal finality. After the capture of Tyre, the city was plunged into a scene of destruction and vengeance. Exhausted by Tyre's prolonged resistance and frustrated by the months of relentless effort, Alexander allowed his troops to unleash their fury upon the inhabitants. This siege had not been merely a battle, it had become personal, a demonstration of power and authority. Alexander intended for the world to understand the cost of defying the Macedonian Empire. More than 7,000 Tyrians perished in the final combats and in the days following, as Macedonian soldiers advanced through the city's streets. Amidst the chaos, many survivors, including women and children, were captured and sold into slavery. An estimated 30,000 Tyrians were enslaved, a decision that brought substantial profit to Alexander's army, but also cast a severe reputation upon the conqueror. In a stark display of power, and as a direct warning to future foes, Alexander ordered the crucifixion of 2,000 Tyrian soldiers along the coastline. These public executions sent a clear message. Resistance to his advance would be met with a merciless response. Tyre, once a symbol of Phoenician resilience and prosperity, now lay in ruins, its defenses shattered, its people slain or exiled. The victory at Tyre was more than a military triumph. It marked Alexander as a leader of relentless determination, willing to push boundaries to achieve his objectives. His strategic brilliance and unyielding will had conquered a challenge that many deemed impossible. Remarkably, the causeway constructed during the siege still partially exists today, a visible testament to this triumph. For Alexander, the capture of Tyre secured control over the Mediterranean coast, ensuring safety for his armies and weakening Persian influence in the region. This success echoed throughout neighboring cities, strengthening his reputation and causing other cities to surrender without a fight, fearing a fate similar to Tyre's. With each conquest, Alexander's name spread further, fueling his legend and cementing his place in history as one of the greatest conquerors of all time. The Siege of Tyre still offers lessons today on the persistence and costs of wartime decisions. Alexander demonstrated that to him no barrier was insurmountable and no limit too great to enforce his will. However, his victory also raises questions about the boundaries of ambition and the impact of war on peoples and cultures. The shadow of Tyre's siege would loom over Alexander's future campaigns. Each city, upon hearing of his approach, would remember the fall of Tyre and the punishment inflicted upon those who dared to resist. As he marched forward, Alexander would encounter other nations and challenges, but none as impactful as the lesson left in the ruins of Tyre. The fall of Tyre marked a turning point in Alexander's campaign. His victory solidified Macedonian control over the Mediterranean and sent a powerful message to all who still resisted. Alexander's ambition was unyielding. With Tyre in ruins, Alexander turned his forces toward Egypt, where he would be welcomed as a liberator from Persian rule. There he would establish the city of Alexandria, which would grow to become one of the greatest centers of culture and power in the ancient world. But new challenges awaited him. The final confrontation with the Persian Empire loomed, and the glory Alexander sought would demand even more daring decisions. In his mind, the world was still far from fully conquered. Tyre was now in his hands, yet on the vast horizon, Alexander saw greater conquests still to come, and the name of Darius III. His legacy had only just begun.